everybody. This is Tali Berman, autism specialist and author, along with my whole child team member.
Hi, Roni Antin-Visloker, individualized biomedical nutritionist.
And what we're going to do over the next couple of videos, something a little bit different than we typically do. Typically, what we've been doing is sort of taking a topic and covering it from both ends. So I'll offer my therapeutic interventions and strategies, and then Roni will offer her biomedical strategies to a particular issue. But what we're going to do for the next couple of videos is we're going to do sort of a picky eating deep dive series because this is a topic we know many parents struggle with, whether your child's on the spectrum or not. I have many friends who have many kids who are very, very picky eaters, not on the spectrum at all. Something I think many people really struggle with. And this happens to be a real area of expertise for you, Roni. So we're going to use this next couple of series where I'm going to basically be interviewing you and asking you questions to get more of the biomedical input around picky eating so that we can help your child have a more expansive diet, have a more nutritious diet, and a diet that's more supportive to their development and growth.
Absolutely.
So before we dive in, Roni, you want to just give a little bit of background about your area of expertise, your knowledge, and your experience around picky eating?
Yeah, of course. Getting a little bit of feedback there.
I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Adjust my volume here. Okay, so of course, individualized biomedical nutrition definitely helps to address this area. This is an area, like you said, that a lot of kids have trouble with. And of course, children on the spectrum or with special needs have a much greater incidence of eating problems. Mm-hmm. One of them being, and the most common one, is food selectivity or picky eating. And that kind of leads me into the first point that I want to make, Tali, is that there's a difference between picky eating in a typical kid and food selectivity or problem eating. In addition to that, it's sometimes hard to really define what picky eating is. So part of what I want to do today in this first session is really to get into some of the factors that might be contributing to the picky eating to help figure out if this is really picky eating that we can deal with, in a basic nutritional session and with good tips and good nutrition, or does it require a little bit more? Does it require, medical intervention, sometimes occupational, etc.?
Okay, so just so everyone knows, this first video is really focused on identifying picky eating, whether this is picky eating or this is more of a problem eating. Is that what you called it, problem eating?
That's right. Problem feeding, problem eating. Again, it's an amorphous area, but yes, that's one.
And then some of the underlying roots or causes of picky eating, and then we're going to get into some more strategies in the upcoming videos. But can you just give us a little bit about your experience? I know it's something that you've studied really extensively and really in depth. So just tell us a little bit about the in-depthness of your knowledge in this area.
Yeah, so of course, I've been blessed to have years and years of experience with families who are dealing with this issue. But in the last 4 to 5 years, I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of research in this department. A doctoral candidate at the moment, and my area of expertise really is in eating problems and gastrointestinal problems and autism. So it's been.
I just wanted to say that because she is your lady. It's such a refined, very specific and targeted area of expertise that I think it's really a privilege to be able to pick your brain in this way. So knowing that that's your background, you want to start with sort of separating what is the difference between picky eating and problem eating or problem feeding issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically speaking, if we were to give kind of a general definition, picky eating is when kids eat a decreased range or decreased variety of foods or have an unwillingness to try new foods. Okay. But a lot of times this can be also, this can be food restriction. And a lot of times it can lead to nutritional needs that aren't being met. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's kind of this spectrum also of picky eating and food selectivity that can also be related to problem feeding. And it's important to kind of separate those and figure out what you're dealing with because they all require different approaches. But I think in general, the best place to start is to really try to identify the root causes. And that helps us to figure out if we're dealing with pickiness that's a little bit easier to address, let's say, with a nutritionist or, with combined therapies like you and I offer in the whole child approach, or if somebody needs more specific feeding therapy.
Okay, so
Totally.
we'll get to that as we get to the root causes, or there's something even within the symptoms that can help us identify if a kid is one versus the other.
Both. But definitely, I think by looking at the three main root causes, it helps to clarify what we're dealing with. So we can start there, and if you have questions along the way, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, great. So let's just get right into there, and as we talk about it, we can sort of then begin to pick apart the different categories.
Exactly. So I think the most important thing, when somebody comes to me is to look at whether there's a medical issue that's underlying. Is there a medical-based issue going on? So a lot of times, as I mentioned, it could be gastrointestinal. For example, there might be gastritis, there might be stomach pain, there might be diarrhea or constipation that's causing discomfort, that's causing the food selectivity in the child. In addition, there might be motor problems. Kids might have difficulty chewing, which is leading to food selectivity, or swallowing sometimes,
right.
Which is not clear. And clearly, that can cause anxiety and cause a child to have an aversion to eating certain foods. In these cases, different therapists would need to be involved, or different doctors, different clinicians, to help treat the underlying cause. But it's important for parents to be aware that this might be going on and not be too obvious.
What would be an indication, if it's not otherwise obvious, that a child's having a hard time chewing or swallowing? Is that something that's really visible to everyone, or are there things that you look for specifically to identify that?
With swallowing, it could be gagging, or it could be refusal of certain foods. And again, speech therapists typically are the ones to enroll in that department. They can do a more thorough assessment. With gastrointestinal issues, it can be tricky, but sometimes you'll see kids pressing on their stomach or posturing if there's stomach pain.
What do you mean by posturing?
Kind of bending over. Yeah. And then again, of course, with constipation and diarrhea, that's a little bit more obvious. It's important to be aware that these things can definitely cause kids to not want to eat certain foods, or sometimes entire groups, or not at all. So just to be aware of that.
Yep. This might not be related to this particular issue, but what about things like rashes or dark circles under their eyes, or headaches, things that might be indicative of allergies or reactions to foods? Are those the kind of medical symptoms that be the root causes of picky eating? Is that part of that same category? Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point, because a lot of times there are food sensitivities or allergies that might be contributing, and what you mentioned now could possibly be a sign in certain children. So important to keep our eyes open, look for those things, and then if we suspect that, again, working with a practitioner, a nutritionist, or somebody else who can help possibly to run testing or use special diets to help identify if that's going on.
All right, so that's the first main root cause that you wanted to address.
Yes, medical-based issues.
Within that, are we already then going to become more aware if this is a picky eating or a problem feeding kind of thing, or not necessarily?
I think that once those underlying causes are addressed, or at least begin to be addressed, you can start to see where things go thereafter.
Meaning, if then treating the medical issue helps a child become more of an expansive eater, then it's more of a picky eater than a problem eating situation. Vice versa.
Yes, absolutely. I understand what you're saying.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Anything else you want to say about that first root cause?
Yes, I just wanted to mention deficiencies also. And this is something that in a biomedical workup we can also identify. A lot of kids will have a mineral deficiency or deficiency of some other nutrient that could also cause food selectivity or picky eating. So something to look into as well.
And can you name one or two specific deficiencies that might contribute to picky eating?
The one that I've most commonly seen is zinc and some of the other trace minerals, selenium, chromium, just a trace mineral blend a lot of times will help kids to kind of open up and be more willing to eat certain food groups. I've noticed specifically with protein foods or meat-based foods that a lot of times that can improve when deficiencies like that are addressed.
Interesting.
Or insufficient.
So are those deficiencies caused by picky eating and then kind of reinforces further picky eating? Is that sort of like a snowball effect that happens?
Kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Absolutely.
Interesting.
So it might be there in the first place. It might be something that worsens as a
Mhm.
child becomes more selective, but definitely something to look out for and at least, address to see how things develop with the pickiness and the eating. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So that was root cause number one, which is sort of identifying underlying medical issues, which sometimes can be fairly obvious. Sometimes requires a little bit of investigative work to understand what might be going on. And you said there were three. So let's get to that second one.
Yeah, the second one is sensory issues. A child who is very sensitive, having hypo or hypersensory issues, meaning they are having a lack of sensitivity or they're oversensitive, can
Mm-hmm.
also it can affect their eating and their food choices. So also, this is an issue that definitely needs to be paid attention to. If your child is preferring certain textures, certain colors, certain tastes, that can be indicative of a sensory factor here in the selectivity. And there are definitely multiple therapists that can help to deal with that. I've also noticed from a biomedical perspective that a lot of times magnesium can be helpful in kind of helping to balance out sensory issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't work for every child, but I have noticed that for some it helps.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we are going to get to a little bit more in the upcoming videos. If that is, let's say, a component of your child's picky eating, how to address that, what we can do to help a child be more open to new foods if that's the issue. But just so everyone's clear, right now we're just sort of helping you to identify what is the root cause of your child's picky eating.
That's right.
Okay, and what's the third?
And the third one is behavioral issues.
Mm-hmm.
If a child is easily distracted or getting up a lot from the table or eating in one place but not another. For example, there are a lot of children that will happily eat at school or in kindergarten, or when they get home, they're much more selective. That can be indicative of a behavioral issue and less of a medical or sensory issue.
And what do you mean by that when you say a behavioral issue?
Meaning that it's something that can be addressed by modifying behavior, and that's
Mm-hmm.
starting to change those patterns, changing the patterns of what's going on at home, and not necessarily something underlying like a medical problem
Mm-hmm.
or a sensory problem. But
Okay.
more,
And I think with that also be sort of issues around attention, right? For some, I know there are many families who struggle with their kids who are not able to sit down for a meal, who are like getting up and going, having a bite, and just like can't have even the attention required to sit and actually eat something in its totality, and that can contribute as well to their eating, which I think is linked to behavioral, but also
but it's almost its own category. That's right.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways that we can help them with that.
Yes.
Okay, so you have underlying medical symptoms, sensory issues, and behavioral issues.
Yeah, I think those are the main three. Once you're able to kind of figure out what's going on, a lot of times it's a combination, by the way. It could be that there's reflux and there's sensory issues and there's some behavioral issues as a result of that going on at home.
Right.
Patterns start to change, the way we address mealtime changes. But once you start to figure out what the pieces are, it helps to go forward and come up with an appropriate plan.
Right. And I know from our own experience working with families together that it's quite amazing to see when there is an underlying medical issue that is being addressed, whether it be a deficiency or whether it be constipation or whatever it is, that a lot of the other things you might have spent so much time trying to work from a behavioral perspective or a sensory perspective don't even need to be addressed because it's taken care of. I think that's always like a big win for a family and this is why it's worth taking the time to identify this, because if you can identify and treat an underlying medical issue, you don't have to spend time or energy on dealing with it from any other perspective because that was the root cause. And then naturally a child's going to be more open to eating proteins because his deficiency has been addressed, or more willing to try new foods because they're not in constant discomfort because of their chronic constipation or diarrhea. So that one's really, if that can be identified and treated, that's a real game changer and makes it just much easier for parents to really address it, because that's
Absolutely
the cause.
Yeah, and that's definitely what you and I and the rest of our team are trying to do, and with the whole child approach, is really to get to the root cause, try and create some order, and go from there. Yeah.
Great. Now, you mentioned the idea of, as we were talking about this just before, about the kind of common deficiencies that you see amongst kids. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. What are the common deficiencies that you see?
You know, generally there's a lot of different deficiencies, or I should call them more accurately insufficiencies, because a lot of times there's a certain level of a nutrient, but it could be more optimal.
Okay.
Okay. But in general, as it relates to picky eating or food selectivity, as I mentioned, you know, zinc a lot of times I've seen be insufficient and really be beneficial when it's replaced. The same with trace minerals.
Mm-hmm.
And then interestingly, just getting macronutrient balance can also help things to balance out in terms of food cravings. That's a whole other issue. But definitely getting things in balance, getting protein in place, getting the micronutrients in place, super
What do you
important.
mean by micronutrients? What's an example of that?
The trace minerals,
Uh-huh.
zinc, selenium, chromium as a group,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times can be deficient. It can cause also, by the way, pica or pica, which is, you know, craving of non-food items. So that's definitely in the category of food problems, not necessarily picky eating, but
Okay.
it's a related subject.
Uh-huh. So when those deficiencies are addressed, then the PICA symptoms usually resolve themselves.
Oftentimes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, this is all very individualized, but yeah, these are different directions that should be explored for sure.
Excellent. Okay. So I know we're going to move on in the next video of sort of like useful tests to do and you know, useful strategies to address picky eating issues. But is there anything else that you want to say about this, or how, now that we know the root causes, how someone can identify whether they need to see a food specialist or whether that's not necessarily a critical piece for their child?
With regards to seeing a feeding specialist, I think again, if and actually, I mentioned to you before, Tali, there's a really lovely handout from the Feeding Matters organization, which I love because they really help to separate the picky eating from the problem feeding. So I'm just going to refer to that for a minute. This is from a handout Dr. K. Toomey. But again, if it's very restricted, less than 20 foods, kids that cry and fall apart when presented with new foods, or refusal of entire categories, those are some examples of when it might be really a feeding problem that's a little bit more serious. If all the others have been ruled out and checked out, you know, medical, sensory, behavioral, and they're still going on and these are happening, a feeding therapist might be good to enroll at that point.
Because I think of many kids who eat less than 20 foods, for example, but it still seems to fall within the category of picky eating. But it's interesting the way you say it just now, that if you've done those three pieces and you've addressed it from a sensory perspective, an underlying medical issue perspective, and, you know, make sure that there were no behavioral issues involved, and if they're still persisting that level of restrictive eating, then it might be something that needs feeding specialist.
A different kind of intervention. That's right.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of material right now just in terms of like navigating through this whole topic. I think that's the important thing. Parents often feel like totally helpless, totally like no idea how to proceed. And the very first piece is like, well, let's just take a moment and identify what is the root cause of your child's picky eating, so that you can move forward in the most effective way possible. So this will wrap up video 1 with that. And if anyone has any questions or comments about this aspect of the topic, feel free to post them below. And we'd love to engage and address that with you. And then we will see you in the next video where we get a little bit more into treatments and testing that can help you move forward. So it's great. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing all your information on picky eating. And we'll keep it going in video 2.
Thanks, Tali.
Take care. Bye.